The collision was not spectacular, just a dull, damp sound, like a sock full of gravel striking expensive metal. I was stopped at a red light in my old '72 Chevrolet Impala, a teal-blue beauty I had restored over 3 years. It was my sanctuary. She, driving a matte black Aston Martin Valkyrie, valued at the equivalent of a small office building, took the turn too sharp and scraped my rear bumper. I got out. The Impala's chrome, shining like a mirror, was plowed through for about a foot. The paint was stripped to the sheet metal. Her Valkyrie, meanwhile, bore only an insignificant scratch, barely an aesthetic flaw. The tinted window rolled down. Behind it, oversized sunglasses and a sneer of contempt I instantly recognized. The bored weariness of those who have never had to justify their existence. "Look, I'm in a rush," she said in a slow, melodious voice, a voice made for charity galas and art galleries. "Insurance will handle it." She didn't even look at the damage. She didn't pull out her phone. She waved her hand, a dismissal, then rolled the window up and sped away, the engine roaring with calculated insolence. I managed to note her license plate, CRA 777, a name like Serafina, no doubt. I took 2 clear photos of the damage and the retreating rear plate. 5 minutes later, as I waited for the police to file the report, a text came from an unknown number. "Sue me. My husband owns every judge and every lawyer in this city. What you drive is scrap metal. Take the cash." No punctuation. Just a cold, absolute declaration of war distilled into 32 words. This was Serafina Thorne, wife of Alistair Thorne, the infrastructure titan, the man who had built half the city's bridges and glass towers. The Impala wasn't scrap metal. It was a relic of an era when things were built to last, not to be consumed and discarded. I typed a simple, unhurried reply. "It's not about the money." She replied instantly. 3 laughing, crying emojis. The laughter of gods. The laughter that denies your value. That specific laughter was the only thing that raised my blood pressure. "My name is Leo Varin. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a cop. I'm a consultant in strategic risk, which means I get paid to find the breaking points in complex systems, the flaws in the walls of power. The one thing I know how to do better than anyone is identify an opponent's equilibrium point, that single lever that, once shifted, topples the entire edifice." I glanced at the crumpled metal. The Impala, which I had named the Honest Mistake, was bruised. But Serafina had just offered me not a repair, but a target. 20 minutes after her last emoji, my phone rang. It wasn't her. "Listen to me." The voice was deep, polite, but fractured by a palpable tension. "Alistair Thorne. Whoever you are, whatever the price, I can triple it." He wasn't talking about the car. He couldn't be. The accident was barely a scratch to him. "What are you talking about? Mr. Thorne?" I infused my voice with a hint of misunderstanding, the simplest trap. He drew a sharp, whistling breath. "Don't play the fool. The accident. The car is insignificant. But I saw your reply. It's not about the money." "That is a threat. Tell me what you want, now." His tone was that of a man who usually only had to snap his fingers. But the urgency, the fear in his voice was a new sound for him. It was the sound of a foundation trembling beneath his feet. "I only filed an accident report," I replied coldly. "If you fear I might find more than that on your wife, perhaps you have good reason to." I hung up before he could respond. The simple act of crunching my fender had placed in my hands something Alistair Thorne feared more than ruin: uncertainty. He thought I was an operative, a business rival. He had just opened his own entryway. The Thorne Holdings empire was a monolith. Infrastructure, construction, real estate. Alistair Thorne had a reputation for monastic discipline, an architect of the city whose calendar contained only columns of figures and meetings with mayors. Serafina was the perfect ornament to this empire, a glacial beauty, a constant presence in society magazines whose sole visible occupation was the Thorn Foundation for Art and Culture. I started with the superficial. That's always where the best threads are found. 3 days after the accident, my Impala was in the garage. I was in my office, an anonymous, secured space above a vintage record store, observing their world. I put my resources to work. 2 analysts, one specializing in public data, the other in cross-border capital flows. The goal? Find an anomaly about Serafina that would make no sense to Alistair. The Foundation's account analysis was disappointing. It was a bottomless pit for lavish parties, but legally unassailable. Her credit card history was a predictable luxury festival. Paris, Milan, Fifth Avenue jewelers. Then, the capital flows analyst found something better than an anomaly, a negative flow. "Look at this, Leo," Clara said, her eyes fixed on her screen. "These transfers from Serafina. They aren't going to her lovers or her boutiques. They go to an escrow account in Panama, then are immediately redirected to a personal account here, in the city. Amount? Small, for their level. 50,000 4 times in 6 months. $200,000 total. And the beneficiary?" Clara slid her finger across her screen. "Dr. Elias Vance, Associate Professor of Civil Engineering at Northwood University. Specialist in material resistance, particularly high-performance reinforced concrete." $50,000 is a sum, but not high-level political corruption. For a man like Alistair, it's a valley's tip. But for Serafina, whose only job was shopping, it was a calculated effort. And the recipient was the key. A civil engineering professor. Why would a billionaire's wife pay an engineer? I recalled Alistair's trembling voice. He wasn't afraid of an accident report. He was afraid I knew what Serafina was doing. And what Serafina was doing was likely cleaning up a mess whose root cause came from her husband. The true equilibrium point was not Serafina's infidelity, but the error she was trying to bury. I pivoted my investigation onto Alistair. I ignored the usual insider trading scandals and focused solely on Thorn Holdings. The previous year, Thorn Holdings had won the most lucrative contract in the city's history. Project Icarus, a massive overhaul and expansion of the heavy transport network, including 4 major bridges and 2 sub-river tunnels. A $10 billion contract. The city was paralyzed by the construction, but Alistair Thorn was hailed as a savior. Digging through the Project Icarus tender documents, I stumbled upon an obscure footnote, buried in thousands of pages of technical specifications. Thorn Holdings had been granted permission to use a new type of concrete mix, Thorite X, supposedly lighter, faster to lay, and more resilient than the standard. Professor Elias Vance was one of 3 experts cited in the initial feasibility report. I contacted a former colleague at the Bureau of Ethics, a cautious and methodical man. "I need all the information possible on Thorite X," I told him. "Specifications, resistance tests, and especially the city's audit reports." He called me back the next day, his voice low and serious. "Leo, the thing is strange. Thorite X was approved, but the full test reports were never made public. It looks like they were sealed by a court order for reasons of trade secrecy. That's not normal for material intended for public infrastructure." Serafina was not the equilibrium point. Thorite X was. The problem with absolute power is that it begins to believe its own lies. Alistair Thorn had convinced the city that his Thorite X was the future. But if he was using his wife's money to silence one of the experts who had initially approved it, it meant that Thorite X was a failure. A scandal of adultery or tax evasion would only have ruined Alistair. The secret of Thorite X, however, could kill thousands. I focused all my resources on Dr. Elias Vance. Vance was a man of recognized integrity, but he had massive gambling debts, a well-hidden secret. Serafina hadn't just paid for silence. She had bought the conscience of a broken man. I found him in an obscure East End bar, sipping a half-price bourbon. He was haggard, with the look of men slowly drowning. I sat across from him without a word, ordered the same bourbon, and placed a wad of documents on the table between us. Bank statements, dates of Serafina's transfers, proof of his debts. It was a gift, wasn't it? I broke the silence. A down payment to keep your mouth shut about Phase 3 of Project Icarus. Vance looked at the documents. His hands were shaking. Who are you? I'm the man whose car Serafina. Thorne scraped. The man her husband called in a panic, thinking I was the messenger of his personal ruin. He was wrong. I am the messenger of his civic ruin. I slid the file toward him. Thorite X, Doctor. Does it meet specifications? Vance lowered his head. No. There is a cold delamination problem. The initial resistance is exceptional, but at sub-zero temperatures, its crystalline structure becomes brittle. I reported a risk of structural failure within 5 years on the Project Icarus bridges. Alistair buried my initial report. He falsified the final report. The project had to move forward. The deadline was too tight for standard concrete. Project Icarus was not just a financial scam, it was a concrete time bomb. Bridges, tunnels, the entire city in danger. Serafina found out? She found out I was going to talk. My conscience, it was eating me alive. I sent her a veiled blackmail email. She panicked. She pulled the money from her personal accounts to silence me, to protect her lifestyle without even knowing the extent of the disaster. Alistair would have killed her if he knew she was using the Foundation account for this. This was the moment of truth. Alistair feared I would expose his wife's adultery and minor embezzlement. But that was just smoke. The fire was Thorite X. I need one thing from you, Doctor, I said. The original report you submitted to Thorne, the one detailing the delamination problem. Vance sighed, guilt and relief wrestling on his face. It's in a safe, in my office at the university. Then let's go. The price of the Impala is the truth. 2 days later, I had Vance's report, an encrypted 800-page file detailing with clinical precision the future disintegration of the city's new infrastructure. Vance was now safe in a dingy hotel under a false name, his personal bank account emptied, but his conscience lightened. I now had 2 dossiers. 1. The Serafina file. Irrefutable evidence of fraudulent use of Foundation funds, embezzlement, and attempted whistleblower suppression, minor obstruction of justice, enough to ruin her reputation and provoke a costly divorce. 2. The Thorite X file, the fulcrum. Vance's report, proving Alistair Thorne had intentionally endangered the city for billions of dollars in profit. This was a criminal act, fraud in the open. I called Alistair Thorne. I used his private number, the one he had given me in his moment of panic. It's Leo Varin, Mr. Thorne, the man with the Impala. A long, tense silence. You've finally decided to name a price, Mr. Varin. That is a wise decision. What is the amount? 10 million? 20? The price hasn't changed. I don't want money. I want a meeting. Alone. Now. I chose the meeting spot carefully. The East Bridge Scenic Overlook, one of the city's oldest bridges, a century-old steel structure that had survived every storm, unlike the ones Alistair Thorne was building. I was there to show him the difference between durability and haste. He arrived at midnight in an armored sedan, a tall, stern-looking man whose eyes betrayed a fatigue that even money couldn't mask. He was alone. He stepped out of the car, adjusted his cashmere coat in the cold wind, and approached, his face obscured by shadow and anger. You are an unwise man, Mr. Varin, very unwise, You have crossed the line." "Which line, Mr. Thorne? The one of courtesy when your wife hit my car? Or the line between profit and collective involuntary manslaughter?" He flinched. It was the first time he had heard an accusation he couldn't buy his way out of. "I don't know what you are talking about," he said in a voice that tried to be firm but trembled slightly. I smiled, a cold, joyless smile. "You called in a panic thinking I was Serafina's accomplice. You feared adultery and money, but you were wrong about the motive, not the worry. Serafina only betrayed you through stupidity. Adultery is insignificant. Her embezzlement is a couple's problem." I placed 2 black files on the stone parapet side by side. Dossier A. File A. Serafina's transfer history to Dr. Elias Vance. The proof she used foundation funds to pay for an engineer's silence. I have all the evidence of her recklessness. This file, if I give it to the press, will cost you your wife, her title, her social standing, and millions in a bitter divorce. But your empire will survive. That is the price of her personal fault. Alistair leaned closer, his eyes fixed on File A. Relief, brief and almost invisible, crossed his face. A divorce was manageable. "Very well," he said. "What is your price for this file? Name your sum." "We come to Dossier B, File B, Mr. Thorne." I tapped the other file. "This is my true price." "What is it?" "It is Dr. Elias Vance's original report on Thorite X, the one you buried. The report that proves the concrete you are using to build our bridges and tunnels will delaminate in the first intense freeze, causing catastrophic structural failure. This file, if I give it to the press, will cost you not only your empire, but your freedom, your reputation, and perhaps even your life, if a bridge collapses before your trial. That is the price of your civic fault." The cold wind blew across our faces. Alistair Thorne, the master of the city's time and space, seemed petrified. His arrogance had evaporated, replaced by the icy sweat of existential fear. He no longer looked at File A. He stared at File B, the specter of his own mortality. "You won't do this," he murmured. "You're a businessman. You want blackmail. I assure you I wouldn't do it, if it were just a bumper story. But it is not. Your wife didn't just hit my car. She exposed the fragility of your empire. You thought I was seeking revenge on her. I found the betrayal you committed against this city." I stepped forward, my face inches from his. "Here's the deal, Mr. Thorne. File A, Serafina, money, adultery, shame, is not negotiable. It will be published tomorrow morning. Her mocking laughter cost me an Impala, and I am making her pay with her social life. That is a correction." "But—" he was about to protest. "But," I continued, keeping my tone level, "File B, Thorite X, fraud, lives, is negotiable. I want you to issue an emergency recall order on Project Icarus by noon tomorrow. I need a public statement from Thorne Holdings citing unforeseen quality issues requiring a change of structural materials and a promise of immediate, cost-no-object reconstruction." He stared at me, his eyes betraying him. "You are asking me to forego billions of dollars in profit. I am asking you to choose between losing money or being tried for collective involuntary manslaughter." I took File B and held it over the railing, the wind snapping the pages. "Accept this condition, and I will keep this file. I will make it disappear. I want you to be humiliated, but I do not want this city to collapse. That is the equilibrium point." Alistair Thorne looked at the black water beneath the bridge. He saw the lights of the city he had thought he owned. He saw ruin and infamy, and he knew he could not fight the truth. He could not own time or physics. "Agreed," he spat, the bitterest word of his life. "Excellent. Now sign this." I pulled out a simple contract, drafted in impeccable legal terms. A promise of emergency recall signed by the CEO dated at the current time, stating the reason for the material change. A document he could not retract without landing himself in prison. He signed, his hands trembling, on the hood of his own armored car. The next morning, my phone did not ring. I received no message from Alistair threatening me, begging me, or insulting me. At 9 a.m., File A was anonymously sent to 3 of the city's leading investigative newspapers. At 10 a.m., the headlines exploded. Magnate Thorne's wife siphons foundation funds to pay for silence. Engineer involved in Project Icarus sought. The detail was macabre, but the story was limited to Serafina's marital shame and financial scandal. She instantly became the pariah her arrogance had destined her to be. At 11 a.m., Thorne Holdings issued a sober but devastating press release. Due to the discovery of unforeseen geothermal factors and a commitment to conservative engineering, Alistair Thorne has ordered an immediate suspension and total material recall on Project Icarus. The company will absorb billions of dollars in extra costs to ensure only the most proven and stable materials are used. It was a public humiliation of unprecedented scale, a tacit acknowledgement that Thorite X was a failure. Alistair had chosen humiliation over disaster. He had sacrificed billions and his company's reputation for innovation to avoid prison. The Impala stayed in the garage for 2 more days. When I went to pick it up, it was more beautiful than before, the bumper replaced, the chrome polished, the teal paint gleaming. The mechanic handed me the bill, fully paid. A man came, very high class, very discreet. He said his client had made a mistake and it had to be corrected beyond all measure. It was Alistair Thorne's final act. A perfect correction, forced by the lever I had found. He had to not only pay for the repair, but ensure it was flawless. Serafina vanished. No statement. Rumors said she went to a company-owned Caribbean island, but the truth is, she was erased. A month later, the city began the slow and costly process of replacing Thorite X with conventional concrete. Thousands of jobs were created. Project Icarus continued, but under unprecedented governmental scrutiny. I received one final text message from a new, unknown number. Not Serafina's, but Alistair's. "Who are you?" A simple question, devoid of threat, the question of a philosopher after seeing the abyss. He wasn't seeking money, he was seeking understanding. I looked at the screen and typed my reply. "Someone who saw the price of your arrogance, the equilibrium point." Then I turned off the phone, and for the first time in weeks, the silence in my old Impala was complete, unbroken by a sound of crumpled metal or a scornful laugh. I hadn't destroyed his world for money. I had destroyed it so that the world of others could continue to stand. Serafina's mistake was not hitting my car. It was texting me and laughing. In doing so, she gave me permission to look closer. And in the world of the elite, nothing is more dangerous than one look too many.